The early morning sun cast long shadows across the private aviation terminal as Dr. Maya Thompson pulled up in her sleek black Mercedes. It was 6:45 a.m., and the terminal was just beginning to buzz with activity. She had deliberately arrived early for her 8 o'clock a.m. flight, knowing that being perfectly prepared was often necessary for someone in her position. Maya checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, adjusting the collar of her navy blue Armani suit. At 35, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had fought hard for every achievement in her life. Her dark skin glowed with health, and her carefully braided hair was arranged in a professional style that had taken her trusted stylist 2 hours to perfect the previous evening. Another day, another battle, she whispered to herself, a habit she had developed during her years in medical school. As one of the few black women in her class, and now one of the youngest neurosurgeons in the country, she had learned to armor herself with preparation and poise. The driver she had hired pulled her Louis Vuitton luggage from the trunk. Maya had chosen each item of her appearance carefully, not out of vanity, but from years of experience knowing that in her world, appearance could either be a shield or a target. Today, she needed it to be a shield. Inside her briefcase were multiple copies of her credentials, her pilot's license, a hobby she had pursued 5 years ago, her medical license, and the details of her chartered flight to the International Neurosurgery Conference in Boston. She was scheduled to deliver a keynote speech about her groundbreaking research on pediatric brain trauma procedures. As Maya walked toward the terminal entrance, her heels clicked rhythmically against the polished floor. Several heads turned to look at her, some with curiosity, others with admiration, and a few with that familiar look of surprise she had grown accustomed to. She held her head high, her posture perfect, each step measured and confident. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of jet fuel and fresh coffee from the terminal's luxury lounge. Maya could see her chartered jet through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a beautiful Gulfstream G650, its white and silver body gleaming in the morning light. She had chosen this particular charter company for their excellent safety record and professional service, having used them several times before. Other travelers in the terminal were the usual mix of business executives and wealthy individuals, many absorbed in their phones or laptops. A couple of them nodded in recognition. Maya had built quite a reputation in both medical and social circles over the past decade. She approached the check-in counter, her documents already in hand. The young woman behind the counter, Sarah, according to her name tag, was new. Maya hadn't seen her during her previous flights. Sarah smiled professionally, though her eyes showed a flicker of uncertainty, that brief moment of cognitive dissonance Maya had seen countless times before when people tried to reconcile their preconceptions with the confident, successful black woman standing before them. Maya drew out her ID and charter confirmation, placing them neatly on the counter. Her movements were deliberate and practiced, each document arranged precisely. The terminal's air conditioning hummed softly in the background, mixing with the distant sound of jet engines and the quiet conversations of other travelers. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, probably another message from the conference organizers confirming the schedule. Maya had been looking forward to this conference for months. Her presentation could potentially change how hospitals worldwide handle pediatric brain trauma cases, potentially saving thousands of young lives. The morning light streamed through the terminal's vast windows, creating patterns on the floor that reminded Maya of the hospital corridors she had walked countless times. She checked her watch. Still plenty of time before the flight. Everything was going according to plan, just as she liked it. Maya believed in being methodical and having every detail arranged perfectly. It was an approach that had served her well in the operating room and in life. Little did she know that in just a few minutes, all her careful preparation would be put to an unexpected test. But then again, Maya Thompson had never been one to back down from a challenge, no matter what form it took. As Maya walked towards the private terminal's security checkpoint, she noticed a shift in the atmosphere. James Peterson, a heavy-set security guard with graying hair and a permanent frown, straightened up behind his desk. His eyes narrowed as they followed her approach, his hand already moving to the barrier gate control. "Excuse me, ma'am," Peterson called out, his voice carrying a tone that Maya had heard too many times before. "The main terminal for regular flights is in the next building." He didn't even try to hide his smirk as he spoke, looking her up and down with obvious judgment. Maya took a deep breath, maintaining her professional composure. "Good morning, sir. I'm Dr. Maya Thompson. I have a chartered flight scheduled for 8 a.m. She reached for her documents, but Peterson held up his hand, stopping her. Listen, lady, he said, emphasizing the word lady with obvious condescension. This is the private aviation terminal. We handle executive flights and private charters here. He spoke slowly, as if explaining something to a child. I think you're confused. Several other travelers had stopped to watch the scene unfold. Maya noticed a few of them exchanging uncomfortable glances, while others pretended not to notice. She could feel her heart racing, but years of performing complex surgeries under pressure had taught her to keep her external calm. Sir, I am quite aware of where I am, Maya replied, her voice steady and clear. I have all my documentation right here, including my charter confirmation, ID, and pilot's license. She began laying out her papers on the security desk, each movement deliberate and composed. Peterson didn't even glance at the documents. Instead, he crossed his arms and stepped out from behind his desk, using his height to try to intimidate her. Ma'am, I've been working here for 15 years. I know our clients, and you're clearly in the wrong place. I'm going to have to ask you to leave before I call for backup. Maya's fingers quietly slipped to her phone in her pocket, pressing record. She had learned long ago to document these encounters. Mr. Peterson, she said, reading his name tag, I would appreciate it if you would simply check my documentation. I'm running on a schedule, and my pilot is expecting me. A few feet away, Sarah from the check-in counter was watching with growing concern. She had already verified Maya's credentials but seemed unsure about challenging the senior security guard. Your pilot? Peterson scoffed, his voice getting louder. Listen here, we don't have time for these games. This is a secure facility, not a place for people to play make-believe. His face was getting red now, and a vein pulsed in his forehead. Maya stood her ground, keeping her voice level but firm. Sir, I understand you're doing your job, but your current behavior is both unprofessional and discriminatory. I've used this terminal multiple times before, and my credentials are in order. Would you like to check them, or should I request your supervisor's presence immediately? Peterson's face twisted into an ugly expression. Are you threatening me? You people always want to make everything about discrimination. I'm protecting this facility from unauthorized access, and right now, you're creating a disturbance. The terminal had grown quieter, with more people openly watching now. A businessman in an expensive suit had taken out his phone and was filming the interaction. Maya could feel the tension building in the air, but she remained steady, her surgeon's hands perfectly still as she reached for her phone. Mr. Peterson, she said clearly, knowing her phone was recording every word, I am a neurosurgeon heading to a medical conference where I'm delivering the keynote speech. I have chartered the Gulfstream G650 through Excellence Aviation Services, tail number N789EX. I am also a licensed pilot. Now, would you prefer to verify my documentation, or shall we escalate this situation to your supervisor? Peterson's face flushed darker, but before he could respond, Maya noticed movement behind him. The terminal manager was walking quickly towards them, his face showing that he had already recognized the situation for what it was. The confrontation was about to take an unexpected turn. Maya felt a strange sense of calm wash over her, the same feeling she experienced in the operating room when faced with unexpected complications. Her phone continued recording in her hand, held steady and partially concealed by her designer briefcase. Years of dealing with similar situations had taught her that documentation was often her strongest ally. Mr. Peterson, she said, her voice carrying across the now quiet terminal, I'm going to give you one more opportunity to handle this professionally. She maintained direct eye contact with the security guard, whose face had turned an even deeper shade of red. Several other travelers had formed a loose semicircle around them, many with their phones raised. Sarah, the check-in counter attendant, had picked up her phone and was speaking quietly but urgently into it. Maya could see the young woman's hands trembling slightly as she cast nervous glances between Peterson and the growing crowd. The morning sunlight streaming through the terminal's windows created long shadows that seemed to emphasize the tension in the air. A well-dressed elderly couple who had been watching the scene unfold finally stepped forward. The woman, wearing an expensive pearl necklace, spoke up. Excuse me, but I recognize Dr. Thompson from last month's charity gala at Metropolitan Hospital. She performed life-saving surgery on our grandson. Her voice carried the weight of authority that came with social status. This is absolutely ridiculous. Peterson's composure slipped slightly, but he doubled down on his position. Ma'am, I appreciate your input, but security protocols must be followed. This person hasn't provided proper identification. He deliberately ignored the documents Maya had placed on his desk, which were still lying there untouched. Maya took out her phone openly now, stopping the first recording and starting a new one. Let's review what's happened so far, she said calmly, as if presenting a case study to her medical students. I arrived at this terminal, where I've flown from multiple times before. I presented my documentation, which you refused to even look at. You made assumptions about my presence here based solely on my appearance, and you've created a security incident where none existed. The sound of rapid footsteps approached from behind Peterson. The terminal supervisor, Mr. Richards, was walking briskly toward them, his face a mixture of concern and embarrassment. He had received Sarah's urgent call and could see the situation rapidly spiraling out of control. Maya continued speaking, her voice clear and measured. I have recordings of this entire interaction. I have multiple witnesses. She gestured to the crowd around them, many of whom nodded in agreement. And I have all my documentation right here, which you still haven't bothered to check. A young man in the crowd spoke up. I got the whole thing on video, Dr. Thompson. Started recording as soon as I saw how he was treating you. Not right at all. He was wearing a Yale Medical School sweatshirt and looked at Maya with admiration. Your lecture last semester on emergency neurosurgery procedures was incredible. Peterson's authority was crumbling visibly now. He looked around, suddenly aware of the numerous phones recording his every move and expression. The crowd had grown larger, and the murmurs of disapproval were getting louder. Even a few of his fellow security officers had gathered at a distance, watching the scene with obvious discomfort. Maya picked up her documents from Peterson's desk, organizing them neatly. I believe your supervisor is here now, she said, nodding toward Mr. Richards, who had finally reached them. Perhaps we can handle this situation properly, although I must warn you that your actions so far have been thoroughly documented. The morning sun had risen higher now, and the terminal was getting busier. More travelers were arriving, quickly picking up on the tense atmosphere. Maya stood perfectly straight, her professional demeanor unwavering. She had faced discrimination before, but this time she had an audience, evidence, and the confidence that came from knowing she was completely in the right. Mr. Richards finally reached their group, slightly out of breath and already reaching for Maya's documents. The confrontation was about to enter its next phase, and Maya was fully prepared for whatever came next. Mr. Richards, the terminal supervisor, straightened his tie as he assessed the situation. He was a tall, lean man in his 50s, with kind eyes and graying temples. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as Peterson immediately launched into his version of events. Sir, this woman was being aggressive and uncooperative, Peterson said quickly, his words tumbling out. She refused to follow proper security protocols and started causing a scene. I was just doing my job to protect the facility. His face was still flushed, and sweat had begun to bead on his forehead. Maya raised an eyebrow but remained silent, letting Peterson dig himself deeper. She simply held up her phone, where the recording was still running. The growing crowd of onlookers shifted uncomfortably, several of them shaking their heads at Peterson's obvious lies. Mr. Richards turned to Maya. Dr. Thompson, could you please explain your side of the situation? His tone was professional, but there was concern in his eyes. He had clearly noticed the many phones recording the incident. Of course, Maya replied calmly. She pulled out her pilot's license first, holding it up for everyone to see. Not only am I a charter passenger, but I'm also a licensed pilot. I could probably give Mr. Peterson here a detailed lecture on aviation security protocols. She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. Peterson's mouth fell open slightly. He hadn't expected this turn of events. Maya then proceeded to demonstrate her expertise, speaking clearly and confidently. The TSA regulations for private aviation terminals, specifically Section 1544-201, require proper identification and documentation, which I presented immediately. She gestured to her papers. The security officer is required to check these documents, not make assumptions based on personal bias. Would you like me to continue with the exact regulations, Mr. Peterson? The Yale medical student in the crowd let out a low whistle of appreciation. Someone else muttered, "She knows more about his job than he does." Maya then played the recording of the entire interaction. Peterson's dismissive tone and discriminatory comments echoed through the terminal's quiet space. His face grew paler with each passing second as his own words were played back to him. Additionally, Maya continued, pulling up her phone's photo gallery. "I have pictures from my previous flights from this terminal. Here's one from last month, and another from 2 months ago." She showed them to Mr. Richards, who nodded in recognition. The elderly woman who had spoken up earlier stepped forward again. "I can confirm that Dr. Thompson regularly flies from this terminal. My husband and I have seen her here at least 3 times in the past year." Her husband nodded in agreement, adding, "She's one of the top neurosurgeons in the country, for heaven's sake." Peterson began to stammer. I didn't know. I was just trying to." Maya cut him off politely but firmly. "Mr. Peterson, you didn't know because you didn't want to know. You saw what you expected to see and acted on your prejudices rather than following proper security procedures." She then turned to Mr. Richards and delivered her masterstroke. "I'd be happy to conduct a training session for your security staff on both aviation security protocols and proper professional conduct. As someone who has experienced discrimination at various airports, I believe I could offer valuable insights." The crowd murmured in approval. Several people had started typing on their phones, likely sharing the incident on social media. The story was about to go viral, and everyone knew it. Mr. Richards looked both impressed and mortified. "Dr. Thompson, I cannot apologize enough for this incident. Please, let's step into my office to discuss this properly." He shot a stern look at Peterson, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. Maya gathered her documents with steady hands. The morning sun now streamed fully through the terminal windows, illuminating her face as she stood tall and dignified. She had transformed what could have been just another incident of discrimination into a powerful teaching moment, and everyone present knew they had witnessed something significant. Just as Mr. Richards was about to escort Maya to his office, a commanding voice rang out across the terminal. "What's going on here?" The crowd parted to reveal Marcus Chen, the terminal's general manager, walking quickly toward them. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. Marcus was well known in the aviation industry, having run several major airports before taking over this private terminal. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored gray suit, and his face showed immediate recognition when he saw Maya. "Dr. Thompson," he called out, genuine warmth in his voice. "I thought I recognized your name on today's flight manifest. Aren't you speaking at the International Neurosurgery Conference?" He approached with his hand extended in greeting, then noticed the tense atmosphere and Peterson's pale face. Maya smiled professionally. "Yes, Mr. Chen, though I've encountered some unexpected delays this morning." She gestured slightly toward Peterson, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Marcus's expression darkened as he quickly assessed the situation. "Mr. Richards, bring up the security footage from the last 30 minutes. His voice was calm, but carried unmistakable authority. One of the other security officers hurried to a nearby computer terminal. Peterson began to fidget with his uniform. "Sir, I can explain." "I'm sure you can," Marcus interrupted, "but first, let's review what actually happened." He turned to Maya. "Dr. Thompson, I believe you have some recordings as well." Maya nodded and played both her recordings. The terminal fell silent, except for Peterson's recorded voice making his discriminatory comments. The security footage played simultaneously on a nearby monitor, showing the entire incident from multiple angles. Marcus watched both with growing concern. He had known Dr. Thompson for years. She was one of their most respected regular clients. She had even performed emergency surgery on his nephew last year, saving the boy's life after a serious accident. "Dr. Thompson," Marcus said, addressing her but loud enough for everyone to hear, "has been flying from this terminal for the past 3 years. She's not only a distinguished neurosurgeon, but also serves on the hospital board and has saved countless lives." He turned to face Peterson directly, "Including the life of your own grandson, Peterson." Peterson's face showed shock as the recognition finally hit him. My grandson's surgeon. The one who operated on Tommy after his bike accident." His voice trembled as the full weight of his actions began to sink in. Maya's expression softened slightly. Yes, Mr. Peterson. That was me. I performed Tommy's emergency surgery 6 months ago. He had a severe head trauma from the bicycle accident. He's doing well now, I hope. Peterson's face crumpled. The man who had been so aggressive just minutes ago now looked completely defeated. He's perfect. The doctors said it was a miracle, that the surgeon was the best they'd ever seen. His voice trailed off as tears began to form in his eyes. Marcus took control of the situation. Dr. Thompson, please accept our deepest apologies. This is not how we treat any of our clients, let alone someone of your standing. He turned to address the crowd. Everyone, please return to your normal activities. We will handle this situation appropriately. The onlookers slowly began to disperse, though many were still typing on their phones, sharing what they had witnessed. The elderly couple who had spoken up earlier approached Maya to express their support before heading to their own flight. Maya checked her watch. Despite everything, she was still on schedule for her flight. She looked at Peterson, who could barely meet her eyes, then at Marcus and Mr. Richards, who were waiting for her response. Gentlemen, she said, her voice carrying the same calm authority she used in the operating room, I believe we have an opportunity here. Instead of punitive actions, perhaps we can turn this into something positive. She paused, making sure she had everyone's attention. I have some suggestions about how we might proceed. Everyone in Mr. Chen's office sat in silence as they waited for Maya to continue. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating the certificates and aviation awards that covered the walls. Marcus Chen sat behind his desk, while Mr. Richards stood near the door. Peterson sat in a corner chair, looking both ashamed and nervous. Maya placed her phone on the desk, stopping the recording. Mr. Chen, she began, her voice steady and clear, many people in my position would be demanding Mr. Peterson's immediate termination. She paused as Peterson visibly flinched. However, I don't believe that would solve the real problem. Marcus leaned forward, his expression curious. What do you suggest, Dr. Thompson? Instead of focusing on punishment, I want to focus on prevention and education. Maya opened her briefcase and pulled out a business card. I work with an excellent diversity and inclusion training organization. They specialize in helping companies identify and address unconscious bias. Peterson looked up, surprise evident on his face. He had clearly expected a very different outcome. The tissues in his hand were crumpled from wiping his eyes earlier when talking about his grandson. I propose a comprehensive training program for all staff, Maya continued. Not just security, but everyone who interacts with clients. This incident shows us that even people who have personal connections to individuals of different backgrounds can still harbor unconscious biases. Mr. Richards nodded thoughtfully. That's a very generous suggestion, Dr. Thompson, but surely some disciplinary action. Maya held up her hand. Mr. Peterson will need to participate in additional one-on-one training sessions, of course, and I believe a temporary reassignment to a non-public facing role during this training period would be appropriate. She turned to Peterson. Would you be willing to participate in such a program? Peterson sat up straighter, his voice hoarse with emotion. Yes, Dr. Thompson. I can't believe I treated you that way, after what you did for Tommy. He shook his head, unable to continue. Sir, Maya addressed Marcus. I've been flying from this terminal for 3 years because of its excellent service and professional staff. This incident is an opportunity for positive change, not just punishment. Sometimes people need to be shown a better way rather than simply being condemned for their mistakes. Marcus smiled, impressed by her approach. Dr. Thompson, your reputation for wisdom clearly extends beyond the operating room. We would be grateful for your help in implementing these changes. Maya looked at her watch. My flight leaves in 20 minutes. I'll have my office send over the training program details this afternoon. She stood up, smoothing her suit. Mr. Peterson, I'll be checking in on Tommy's progress when I return. I expect to hear good things about your participation in the training program. Peterson nodded vigorously, still looking emotional. Yes, Doctor. And I'm truly sorry. I don't know how I can ever make this right. Make it right by learning and changing, Maya replied firmly. That's all any of us can do when we recognize our mistakes. Mr. Richards stepped forward. I'll escort you to your flight, Dr. Thompson. Your bags have already been loaded. As Maya prepared to leave the office, Marcus spoke up one final time. Dr. Thompson, thank you for turning what could have been a devastating incident into an opportunity for growth. Not many people would have shown such wisdom and compassion. Maya paused at the door. Mr. Chen, in my work as a surgeon, I've learned that healing is always better than hurting. Sometimes that applies to situations outside the operating room as well. She smiled warmly. I look forward to seeing the positive changes when I return next month. As she walked through the terminal toward her flight, Maya could feel the weight of what had just happened. She had transformed a moment of discrimination into an opportunity for lasting change. The morning sun now filled the terminal completely, and as she walked towards her plane, several people nodded at her with respect and admiration. The video of Maya's encounter with Peterson spread across social media like wildfire. By the time her plane landed in Boston 3 hours later, her phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. The clip had been viewed over 1 million times, with people praising her composure and professional handling of the situation. Sarah, the check-in counter attendant who had witnessed everything, had posted her own account of the events. I watched Dr. Thompson transform a horrible situation into a teaching moment, she wrote. Instead of responding with anger, she showed us all how to create real change. The post had gone viral, with thousands of comments and shares. The following morning, as Maya prepared for her keynote speech at the medical conference, major news networks were already running the story. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't the discrimination. It was her response to it. Headlines read, "Neurosurgeon turns discrimination into education, and doctor's compassionate response goes viral." The private aviation terminal's management didn't wait to act. By noon, they had issued a public statement. We deeply regret the discriminatory treatment Dr. Maya Thompson experienced at our facility. Following Dr. Thompson's wise counsel, we are implementing immediate changes in our training protocols. We are grateful for her leadership in helping us address this issue constructively rather than punitively. Peterson's grandson Tommy, now a healthy 12-year-old thanks to Maya's surgical skills, appeared with his family on a local news segment. "Dr. Thompson saved my life," the boy said simply. "And now she's helping my grandpa become a better person." His mother wiped tears from her eyes as she spoke about how Maya had turned a devastating situation into an opportunity for healing. The aviation industry took notice. Within a week, 3 other major private terminals reached out to Maya's recommended training organization. They wanted to implement similar programs proactively, rather than waiting for incidents to occur. Peterson himself wrote an open letter that was shared on the terminal's website. "My actions were inexcusable. Dr. Thompson had every right to demand my firing. Instead, she showed me the same care and wisdom she showed my grandson in the operating room. She chose to heal rather than hurt. I am committed to learning from this experience and helping others avoid making the same mistakes." Maya's inbox filled with messages from other medical professionals of color sharing similar experiences. Many praised her for handling the situation in a way that could create lasting change. The American Medical Association reached out, asking her to speak at their next conference about addressing discrimination in healthcare settings. One evening, about a week after the incident, Maya received an unexpected email. It was from a young black girl in high school who wanted to become a doctor. "I saw how you handled that situation," she wrote. "You showed strength without losing your compassion. I want to be just like you when I become a surgeon." The terminal's new training program began the following Monday. Peterson attended every session, taking notes and actively participating in discussions. His colleagues noticed a marked change in his behavior and attitude. During breaks, he would share the story of his grandson's surgery and how Dr. Thompson had saved not only the boy's life, but also his grandfather's dignity. Sarah, who had been uncertain about speaking up during the incident, enrolled in an advocacy training program. "Dr. Thompson showed me that we all have a responsibility to create positive change," she explained to her colleagues. "Sometimes that means finding constructive solutions rather than just pointing out problems." The story continued to spread, becoming a case study in effective responses to discrimination. Business schools added it to their ethics curriculum. Diversity trainers used it as an example of how to transform confrontation into education. Maya watched all of this unfold with quiet satisfaction. As she performed another delicate surgery 2 weeks later, she thought about how one moment of confrontation had sparked a movement of positive change. Her hands remained steady as she worked, just as they had during the incident at the terminal. The world had expected anger and punishment. Instead, she had offered wisdom and healing, and sometimes she knew that was the most powerful response of all. 6 months after the incident, Maya stood at the podium in the terminal's newly renovated training center. The room was filled with aviation staff from across the country, all eager to hear her speak at the first National Aviation Diversity Summit. The familiar faces of the terminal staff sat in the front row, including a much-changed James Peterson. Change doesn't always come from punishment, Maya began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. Sometimes it comes from understanding. She clicked to the first slide of her presentation, which showed a picture of her with Tommy, Peterson's grandson, at his recent middle school graduation. The audience sat in rapt attention as Maya shared how one incident had sparked a movement across the aviation industry. In the past 6 months, 27 private terminals had adopted similar training programs. Reports of discriminatory incidents had dropped by 60% at locations where the program was implemented. Peterson, now serving as a peer counselor in the training program, stood up to share his story. "Dr. Thompson didn't just save my grandson's life," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She saved my life too. She showed me that it's never too late to learn and change." He was wearing a new badge that identified him as a diversity and inclusion ambassador. Sarah, the check-in counter attendant, had been promoted to training coordinator. She helped develop a protocol for staff members to safely intervene when they witnessed discrimination. "We call it the Thompson Protocol," she explained to the audience. "It emphasizes education over confrontation, understanding over anger." Marcus Chen, the terminal manager, presented some remarkable statistics. Customer satisfaction had increased by 40%. Staff morale was at an all-time high. The terminal had become a model for others in the industry, with regular visits from aviation professionals wanting to learn from their example. As Maya listened to these presentations, she thought about all the changes that had occurred. The terminal now had a diverse hiring committee. They had established a scholarship program for minority students interested in aviation careers. Even the physical space had been transformed, with artwork and photographs celebrating diversity in aviation history. Tommy, now 13 and dreaming of becoming a pilot himself, had started a club at his school called Future Flyers for All. The club focused on introducing aviation careers to students from all backgrounds. Maya had visited as a guest speaker, sharing her experience as both a surgeon and a licensed pilot. But the most important change, Maya continued in her speech, isn't in the numbers or programs. It's in the conversations we're now willing to have. She gestured to the diverse audience before her. 6 months ago, many of us wouldn't have believed this room was possible. One of the participants raised her hand. "Dr. Thompson, what do you say to people who think your response was too gentle? That Peterson deserved to be fired?" Maya smiled thoughtfully. Punishment might have satisfied anger, but would it have created change? By choosing education over retaliation, we didn't just help one person, we started a movement. The day concluded with the announcement of the Thompson Initiative, a nationwide program to promote diversity and inclusion in private aviation. Maya was named as the honorary chairperson, though she insisted that the real work would be done by the staff members who dealt with these issues daily. As she prepared to leave, Peterson approached her with his grandson Tommy. The boy was wearing a pilot's cadet uniform from his new aviation club. "Dr. Thompson," Tommy said, beaming, "I got an A on my science project about the brain. Grandpa helped me research it." Maya looked at the two of them, the boy she had saved through surgery, and the man she had helped through compassion. They represented everything she had hoped to achieve, healing that went beyond the physical to touch hearts and minds. As the sun set over the terminal, casting long shadows through the windows, Maya thought about how one moment of confrontation had led to countless moments of transformation. She had turned a barrier into a bridge, and in doing so, had shown others how to do the same. The legacy of that morning 6 months ago wasn't just in the programs or protocols. It was in the changed hearts, the open minds, and the hope for a future where such incidents would become increasingly rare. Maya had proven that sometimes the strongest response to discrimination isn't anger or retaliation. It's the wisdom to transform it into an opportunity for growth.